Atlanta, 1965. The city was on the brink of transformation, its skyline growing taller, its neighborhoods swelling with new families, its streets humming with the optimism of a place that believed its best days were ahead. But beneath the shine of Lenox Square's freshly polished floors and the polite smiles of Buckhead bank tellers, there were shadows no one wanted to name. It was here, in this version of Atlanta, safer on the surface, quieter after dark, that a woman named Mary Shotwell Little lived what should have been the start of her forever. She was 25, newly married, building a life in a city that still felt small enough to know your neighbors. She had friends, a steady job, and a husband she called every night while he traveled for work. By all accounts, Mary's story should have been unremarkable. One more life unfolding in the soft glow of mid-century Southern comfort. But on an ordinary October evening, under the fluorescent hum of a brand new shopping mall, something happened. Something that left her car returned like a ghost, dusted and red clay with the smell of blood in the air and pieces of her life scattered across the seats. Something that sent detectives spiraling into a maze of misdirection, anonymous threats, and a trail of receipts that led far from Atlanta. Let's go behind the headlines to see if we can find out what happened on that chilly October night in 1965. In 1940, Mary Shotwell was born to two loving, hardworking parents who facilitated an extremely middle-class upbringing in Charlotte, North Carolina. Consistent with her childhood, Mary was a stand-up young lady. She was exceedingly active throughout high school. She was a pageant queen and, interestingly enough, the school mascot. While this may have been a secret at the time, we all know that Mary would prance around her high school wearing a huge horse head. Cute, but imagine the smell. When Mary graduated from her high school, she made a quick transition to the Women's College of the University of North Carolina, now UNCG, or the University of North Carolina, Greensboro. She majored in administration and secretarial work, like many other women at the time. While it was becoming increasingly more acceptable for women to obtain higher educations and work, the majors that were offered to women or were seen as socially acceptable were few and far between. Throughout college, she was the it girl. She sang in the choir, passed her classes with flying colors, and even the head of the elections board, but like so many others, she had dreams of escaping Charlotte. Upon graduating from college, Mary really wanted to move to New York City, the Big Apple. However, Mary's parents weren't so fond of her being so far away in such a scary city, so they compromised, and Mary moved to Atlanta. Now, today, Atlanta isn't so different from New York in terms of population, crime, and the bane of every Georgian's existence: the traffic. Back in the late 50s and early 60s, Atlanta was much smaller and much less densely populated, and harbored a lot less crime, completely different than the Atlanta we know and sometimes love today. So, like any responsible young woman, Mary found herself a job in Atlanta and made the move. She started and ended her adult life working for C&S, or Citizens and Southern National Bank, as a secretary in Buckhead, which was just as bougie then as it is today. She moved in with a couple of roommates and was really enjoying her newfound freedom. The women's college she attended was quite strict, so moving to Atlanta was a whole nother monster. At her college, the students who, shocker, were all women, weren't even allowed outside after dark or off campus without explicit permission. So she quickly found her groove in Atlanta and fell head over heels into her freedom, and also into love. Through a couple of mutual friends, Mary met again Roy Little Jr. Roy also worked for C&S, but in a much higher department. Funnily enough, Roy and Mary knew each other as children. Before the Shotwell family made the move to Charlotte, they spent a few years in Georgia. It's unspecified where, but we do know that Roy and Mary were classmates in their formative years. While they never romantically connected then, they sure were now. While Mary was reportedly smitten with Roy, some of her friends felt quite the distaste for him. When the two married in September of 1965, some of her girlfriends refused to attend the wedding and didn't agree with the union. However, the reasons are never disclosed. Perhaps like a lot of other aspects of this case, that reasoning was kept behind closed doors. Shortly after Roy and Mary tied the knot, many of Mary's co-workers and close friends noticed a strange change in her behavior. She had been acting as if she was scared of an unknown force, or rather, just straight up paranoid. The week of October 12th, 1965, Roy had been out of town on business. Where he was is unknown, but he was at least 2 hours south of the couple's Atlanta residence. However, they were still newlyweds. It was only about 6 weeks after their wedding, so they called on each other each night and throughout the days just to check in and say hi. As the week passed, Mary grew more and more excited about her husband's return the following Friday, and soon enough, Thursday rolled around. As a woman in the honeymoon phase, Mary organized a surprise dinner party. So Mary went to work that morning at the bank and likely tapped her shoes anticipating Roy's return. After work, Mary went to the brand new Lenox mall that surrounded a colonial grocery. She got some food to prepare for the dinner party, shopped at Rich's department store, and then had dinner at S&S Cafeteria with her dear friend and coworker, Isla Stock. Now, Lenox Square is well known today, but in 1965, it was a sight to be seen. It was freshly built, had tons of stores, and a massive parking lot. And today this sounds pretty standard for any shopping center, but then this was the hottest new spot in town, and its tagline, "See you there at Lenox Square." After finishing up dinner, Isla and Mary say their goodbyes, and Mary kind of rushes away. She had perishable groceries after all, and we've all been there. But other than that, Isla says Mary was in great spirits for the whole night. So around 8 p.m., Isla walks to her car, and Mary maybe walks to her brand new gray Comet Mercury, but let's just say there won't be a dinner party. The morning after Isla and Mary had a jovial dinner at the popping Lenox Square, Mary was set to be at her desk at C&S Bank. However, she never showed. This was not like Mary at all. She was punctual and would inform someone if she had been sick, but the bank heard less than nothing from her, so her boss attempted to call her home. No answer. He called Roy. Roy answered, but had been in the car driving back towards Atlanta and hadn't heard anything from Mary since the previous day. And without text or location or any of the crazy gadgets we have today, Mary's boss talked to Isla, and Isla told him about everything they did the night before. And Isla recalled Mary being parked in a spot in the yellow section in Area 32. So Mary's boss called the mall, and the security did a quick sweep and said her car was nowhere in the lot. So Mary's boss quickly called the police. Once that call went through, the search for Mary exploded. She had a lot going for her in the 60s. White female, newly married, and well off. People made it a priority to look for her, but they didn't even know where to start. Not to mention, Mary was 25 at this point. She very well could have just overslept or Lord knows what. But nevertheless, a woman hunt ensued. They check her home, no car. They asked the landlady if Mary had been around, and she says she hadn't seen her. So out of ideas, they go back to Lenox Square, the last place Mary was confirmed to be seen. Remember how security said her car wasn't there? Well, now somehow, a few hours later, her 1965 Comet sat in the exact same spot Isla had said it was in. And immediately the police talked to security to try to figure out why they said her car wasn't there when it had been. Maybe in some way they missed it initially, but they had patrol out all night and said only one car was in the lot overnight, and it was tracked back to a man who had left it there because the bank was trying to repossess it, so he was hiding it. Nothing to do with Mary, but somehow magically, miraculously, or simply by design, here her car sat. The moment police approached Mary's car, something is very clearly off. It's covered in a dusty red film of dirt. That suggests it had been driven on some back roads, which Mary likely wouldn't have done herself. Then, the inside of the car is a whole other mystery. There's blood, not a ton, but a significant amount, which was often compared to the amount you may get if you have a particularly intense nosebleed. The blood was found on the driver's side handle, the passenger side window, and on the vinyl seats. What's weird is that within some of the blood were blades of grass. Although it wasn't a lot of blood, it had been very awkwardly smeared, almost as if it had been intended to look staged. The smears wouldn't have happened naturally with such an insignificant amount of crimson. The groceries she had purchased the day before sat completely undisturbed in the back seat. No matter what, someone wanted others to find that car, otherwise it would have never been returned. They also located some items that immediately discouraged law enforcement. They found her underwear neatly folded and placed on the center console, which was confirmed to have been worn by her. They also found stockings and other undergarments haphazardly shoved in the crevices of seats, which makes you wonder, why fold the underwear and try to hide the stockings? Her bra was also found simply sitting on the floorboard of the driver's seat. There were a couple of things missing from the scene that Mary had reportedly been wearing the previous night. A long-sleeved olive green dress, her purse, keys, coat, and her jewelry, including her engagement ring and UNCG class ring. Going in circles, the location of the car and examining its contents raised many questions. People theorized it was staged, that Mary didn't want to be found, and others feared the worst. You can infer. However, the police kept on investigating. The police looked at Mary's odometer and determined that there were 41 unaccounted for miles that had been driven. You're probably wondering, how in the hell would police know that? Well, it was a common practice at the time to vigilantly track your mileage and keep an eye on your odometer. Whether this was just because they didn't have all the lights and gizmos that let you know when something was wrong with your car, or the people back then were just that anal, is a mystery. Even so, the police were able to calculate based on Roy's last documentation of the Comet's mileage and factors in everywhere Mary would have driven. So in reality, the 41 miles was likely a guesstimate. So there's now a search radius. Because the car left and returned, the police assumed the car was driven somewhere within 20 miles away from Lenox Square and then 20 miles back. So they looked everywhere in every direction within this radius. There are choppers. The press had already got papers rolling out with her face plastered on them. The bank put up a $1,000 reward for anyone with information, and people are searching their own houses for Mary. They looked hard, but they never found anything. Not Mary, and not a speck of evidence. So they continued on with the car, as it's the only clue to this mystery they currently have. They tested the blood, and while DNA wasn't advanced like it is today, they determined it was Mary's blood type, and that it likely was her blood. So now, they knew what seemed pretty obvious. Next, they tested the car for fingerprints and were able to lift 40 to 50 print samples. And maybe you're thinking this is the break in the case. No, police had their paws in Mary's car all day since they found it, and guess what? Not one cop in the entirety of this investigation wore any type of gloves. So all those prints they pulled, they all belonged to the officers. Another odd thing was Roy was pretty hot and cold about the whole thing. He housed Mary's family from North Carolina while they waited for the phone to ring, and he told the press and cops that all he wanted to do was see her home safe. But he was also oddly bewildered by the fact that her purse was never found, which, what a weird thing to focus on, you know? Roy reportedly said, "A pocketbook is a thing a woman wouldn't go without, and no man would be caught with." So it seems like he's saying he doesn't think she ran away because what about her purse? And doesn't think she was kidnapped because what man would be seen with a purse? The 60s were a hoot, y'all. A couple of days later, with still no sign of Mary, one of her high school friends reached out to Atlanta police and informed them that Mary had recently confided to her that she was frightened for her life. The friend also made it clear that Mary felt particularly unsafe when alone in her car. Hearing about this made some others remember some oddities in Mary's life in the weeks leading up to her disappearance. Soon after Roy and Mary got married, some of her coworkers said that she had been dodging calls at work from someone. But the one time she answered, someone overheard the conversation. She is reported to have told the other person on the line, "I'm a married woman now." Then some time went on, and she continued, "You can come over to my house anytime you like, but I can't come over there." Then Mary received 5 roses in a bundle at work from a seemingly secret admirer. She didn't fawn over the flowers like a woman in love, no. She stood up and trashed them upon receiving them, which most certainly raised some questions. The police were able to find the florist who fulfilled this order, but when they talked to the shop owner, they had no idea who had ordered them. They talked to everyone at the bank, and there were rumors that there was a prostitution ring being run out of the bank and that there had been several incidents of lesbian sexual harassment, but none of that ever amounted to anything or was recorded to have been investigated at all. So once again, the police had fragments of the puzzle but were grasping at straws for all of the connecting pieces. And then November rolled around. In mid-November, the first real break in the case made itself known. Someone at C&S Bank was sitting at their desk going through the motions until something exceedingly intriguing slid across their desk. It was a credit card receipt bearing the signature Mary Little Jr. Nowadays, you swipe your card and it's recorded within milliseconds. You also get a pesky email reminding you that you just spent $9 on a coffee. Back in 1965, it took a few weeks to get your statements. The bank statement said Mary had used her gas card at a service station in Charlotte, North Carolina, her hometown. The receipt was timestamped to be somewhere around 2:30 a.m. With this statement, they knew she was alive at this time to sign the receipt, and the signature matched her handwriting. And they also knew there was someone else, or at least another car involved, because her Mercury Comet was nowhere near Charlotte. The next day, another credit card receipt, dated the day after Mary went missing in the early afternoon, but this time in Raleigh. So investigators fly out to North Carolina and talk to the employees at each station. It was a month ago and I can't remember the people I saw yesterday, but it was both employees remembered seeing Mary. This was likely because full-service gas stations were all the rage, and there was a lot more interaction involved than there is today. The clerk would have come out of the store and filled up your car for you so that you didn't have to get out. The Charlotte employee said he saw Mary with one other man, and that she had been sitting in the passenger seat lying down and covering her face. He also said he noticed blood on her head. The Raleigh attendant says she was with two men and was also bloodied, but why wouldn't they tell anyone? The reasoning is heartbreaking. Domestic violence was severely overlooked and deemed acceptable in a lot of places at this time. So the men working the gas stations both said that they believed it to be a dispute between husband and wife, and not necessarily a cause for concern. Her signature also bore the Raleigh receipt, was matched with her handwriting, confirming her whereabouts at the time. They were looking in the wrong areas, hell, the wrong state. After news of the credit card slip circulated, Roy received a harrowing anonymous phone call that demanded him $20,000 for the ransom of Mary. The caller told Roy to meet him in the Pisgah National Forest, North Carolina. Obviously, Roy informed police, and they sent an FBI agent to the meetup location where they found a blank piece of paper taped to a sign. After that, they never heard from the caller again and deemed it a hoax. But I can't help but think, was it a misdirection? As months went on and Mary's case grew colder and colder, something insane happened. In the spring of 1967, another woman in Atlanta went missing. She was only 22 and she had quite a few eerie connections to Mary. Once the bank settled from Mary's disappearance, they had a position to fill. Diane took the job that Mary had previously been doing. She was the new Mary. She was also roommates with the same women Mary had previously lived with before marrying Roy. That's all crazy in and of itself, but get this. A few weeks before she disappeared, Diane received 5 roses at her desk at C&S Bank, just like Mary. She had also recently gotten engaged, adding to the similarity of being a recent bride or future bride like Mary. According to her co-workers, she had also been fielding calls at work and told multiple people that she was scared because it was also similar to Mary's story. Cops were once again able to track down the florist who sent them and found out that the roses had been sent by a family that Diane had been babysitting for. So the cops ruled it a coincidence and determined there was no connection between Mary and Diane. But it all just seemed too convenient. Unlike Mary, Diane was quickly found after she was reported missing. Sadly, she was not found alive. Her car was located around 2:30 a.m. outside a laundromat. The keys were in the ignition and blood seeping from the trunk. Upon opening the trunk, investigators were greeted with a horrendous scene. Diane had been beaten to a pulp and bound, and then was stuffed in the trunk of her own car between her spare tire and a cardboard box. Even worse, Diane's case has still not been solved. Now, let's backtrack a little bit. It took some serious digging to find this out, but apparently someone claimed they had knowledge about Mary's disappearance. Stay with us because this timeline gets a little rocky, but that can likely be attributed to the age of the case. On September 6, 1966, just shy of a year after Mary disappeared, a man named Larry Stargell from Gainesville, Georgia, wrote to police requesting an interview and said he had something he needed to get off of his chest that directly related to Mary's case. The kicker? He was incarcerated at the time, serving a life sentence for murder. Nevertheless, he wanted to tell the cops about something he had seen the previous year, before he was placed in prison. Investigator Jack Perry went to Reidsville State Prison and sat down with Larry, where he told him that he was working at a theater at the time, and a man named Jerry Mason approached him, and they became fast friends. They spent a lot of time bouncing around Atlanta, committing petty crimes together, and sometimes even burglarizing places. One night after Jerry had thrown back a few too many drinks, he told Larry that he wanted to show him something. The curiosity got to Larry, as it likely would anyone, and Jerry took him out to the Atlanta Municipal Airport. When they arrived, they looked through a telescope, and Jerry referenced where they were looking and told Larry that Mary was buried there. Larry didn't believe him at first until Jerry pulled out a C&S bank card with Mary's name on it. Apparently, Larry and Jerry somewhat frequented this small airport. However, Larry never really knew what they were doing. He said Jerry would go to a baggage locker and remove a brown envelope that Jerry said contained cash. The most he ever let on was that he was actively blackmailing someone who had hired Jerry to kidnap Mary. Jerry was threatening to tell the truth if this mysterious hirer didn't continue to pay him. This seems like some pretty important information, but Larry continued and told police he was actually there when Mary was murdered. The following is the police report from September 1966, the day when Larry tells investigators everything that happened. On October 14th, 1965, Stargell goes to a movie alone at the Lowe's Grand Theater on Peachtree Street in Atlanta. He gets out of the movie around 3:30 p.m. and heads over to the Henry Grady Hotel, where he is meeting Mason. Jerry, at 4 p.m., Mason and another man ask him to go to a James Bond movie, Thunderball, at Lenox Square Theater. He obliges. The three men arrive at the theater at 4:30 p.m., but after the movie, they ask Stargell to stay in the theater for a few more minutes until they return. At 8 p.m., Mason returned to the theater alone and tells Stargell that he wants to go back to the hotel to clean up. He's carrying a large paper shopping bag with handles. They go to the Imperial Hotel and go to a room registered under the name Dean Lucky, Mason's alias. Mason is wearing a bright yellow windbreaker jacket, black pants, and a yellow shirt, which makes the bright blood on his right sleeve and on the leg of his pants stand out. Mason tells Stargell that he needs to meet with the other man in Mount Holly, North Carolina by 9 p.m. Mason changes his clothes and they grab dinner at the hotel. Mason leaves and Stargell takes a bus home to Gainesville, Georgia. The following Sunday, October 17th, Mason and the other man come to the theater where Stargell works. After the theater closes, they all go to the Imperial Hotel in Atlanta, and Mason shows him a large sum of money, which he claims is $5,000 for a kidnapping. Mason says, "Remember when we were out at Lenox Square? You remember I had blood on my jacket?" Stargell asks him if they killed someone, and Mason replies, "No, she's not dead yet." But he tells Stargell they were paid $5,000 each to kidnap this woman. When Stargell questions Mason's story, Mason pulls out a C&S charge card with Mary Shotwell Little's name on it. Stargell says, "Don't you know you'll get caught? Everybody in the state of Georgia is looking for her." Mason replies, "They'll never find her. We aren't worrying about her being found because she won't be found." He does not see the two men for 3 weeks until they show up at his theater unannounced again. They pile into a car and drive to a house in the mountains via a dirt road near Mount Holly, North Carolina. Upon entering the small house, there are 3 other men there, around 30 years old. They leave soon after. Stargell goes to bed but is awakened by arguing at 4 a.m. A man is arguing with a woman in another bedroom. He hears the woman ask if they are going to take her back to Atlanta. He hears the man reply, "Keep on talking and you are never going back." The next morning, Stargell questions Mason about the woman. "It's the little woman we kidnapped from Atlanta." Mason answers, promising that they are taking her back to Atlanta the day after tomorrow. Mason takes Stargell into the bedroom where he sees a naked woman sleeping on the bed. Her bottom half is slightly covered with a sheet. She has several bruises on her arm, forehead, neck, jaw, and cheek, but he can't get a good look at her face. Her hands are tied behind her, and her feet are tied with a thin white cord. She has a white cloth bandage over her right eye. In the days that follow, a man takes food into the woman once a day. The day they are ready to leave, he gives her some mismatched clothing, a brown skirt and blouse. With the woman in tow, the 3 men, including Stargell, leave the house around 1:30 p.m. and head back to Atlanta. Stargell is in the front passenger seat and Mason is driving. The man and kidnapped woman are in the back seat. Within 15 minutes on the road, the woman looks out the left rear window. The man violently grabs her by the mouth and jerks her over to him. He pulls out a long fishing knife and plunges it under her left ear. She moans. He thrusts the blade about 7 inches into her skin as blood gushes from her neck. He shoves her to the floor and attempts to get up, but then settles back into a heap on the floor, where he throws a heavy rug over her limp body. Hearing this, the police finally know what may have happened to Mary, according to Larry's account. However, it has raised so many questions still. Is he a reliable source? Why did they kill her if they were planning on taking her back to Atlanta? Why did someone want to kidnap her? And unfortunately, these questions are never answered. Police did follow this account and found Jerry Mason's place of work, which confirmed for the day of and after Mary initially went missing, he had been at work in North Carolina, not in Atlanta. Police also went to the Atlanta Municipal Airport and examined the spot where Mary was said to have been buried. An employee recalled seeing a freshly dug spot around there about the same time Mary would have been buried, but the cops never dug the spot up. Also, after confirming Jerry was at work and had an alibi, they never pursued him. They seemingly just forgot he existed and believed he went to work. He could have paid someone to punch in for him. He worked for a large water company where there were many employees. He could have very easily slipped through the cracks. It also makes you wonder, why did Larry wait to come forward? Well, he was reportedly very scared of Jerry Mason and was worried about the implications of his being present during the kidnapping and killing of Mary Shotwell Little. So perhaps he felt safer or simply didn't care when he came forward because he had already been incarcerated. Despite this account, which scarily adds up to all the other things we know about Mary's disappearance, no arrest was ever made, and the case remains open to this day, which is honestly ridiculous because they could have at least dug up that spot today to see if her remains were there. With the DNA and technology we have today, this case very well could be solvable, but it seems as though the Atlanta Police Department, the FBI, and the GBI have bigger fish to fry. Time has a way of sanding down the sharp edges of mystery. Faces fade, names slip from headlines, but Mary Shotwell Little's story, it never really softens. It just sits there like something caught in your peripheral vision, too far to see clearly, too close to ignore. We do have pieces. The red clay on her car, the blood that didn't quite belong, the receipts that placed her bruised and hidden, hundreds of miles from home. We know about the phone calls, the roses, the fear she couldn't quite name out loud, and we know that another young woman in a disturbingly similar position would end up dead not long after. What we don't know, and what may haunt this case forever, is the why. Why Mary? Why that night? Why return her car like a calling card? Maybe it was someone she trusted, someone who thought she knew them well enough to open her door. Maybe it was something far larger, an operation buried deep in Atlanta's C&S Bank, or the quick end to a marriage that no one could tell the tension of. Or maybe we've been looking at the wrong parts of the puzzle all along. If you've got your own theory, we want to hear it. What do you think really happened? Who drove those 41 missing miles? And what became of Mary after that night in 1965? If you know anything, even something that seems too small to matter, contact Crime Stoppers Atlanta at 404-577-TIPS, because cases like this, they don't stay buried, they wait. This has been Joshua John with Behind the Headlines, and until next time, stay safe.